The bank office smelled like coffee and betrayal. I sat in a cold leather chair, staring at a document the loan officer had just slid across the desk. "Mrs. Cruz," she said, her voice professionally sympathetic, "we've issued $180,000 under your name." The numbers swam before my eyes. 180,000. I'd never taken out a loan in my life. Beside me, my husband Mateo squeezed my knee reassuringly. "It's fine, honey," he said smoothly. "You signed it weeks ago, remember?" When we talked about the renovation project, everyone in the room looked at me expectantly. The loan officer, the bank manager standing by the door, Mateo with his practiced smile. My hands started shaking as I picked up the document. There was my name in neat cursive at the bottom, but something was wrong. "That's not my signature," I whispered. The room went silent. Mateo's hand tightened on my knee, his fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. "Of course it is," he laughed nervously. "You've been so stressed lately. Maybe you just don't remember." The bank manager stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Mrs. Cruz, this is a serious accusation. Are you suggesting fraud? My name is Alexis Cruz, and that was the day I realized my husband wasn't building a future with me. He was building one on my name." Mateo was a master at control. Within minutes, he'd convinced everyone in that office that I was confused, overwhelmed, maybe even a little unstable. He showed them our joint bank statements, emails discussing home improvements, text messages where I'd supposedly agreed to everything. The loan officer relaxed. The bank manager apologized for the confusion. I sat there, numb, watching my husband rewrite reality in real time. At home, he turned it around completely. "You said I could handle our finances, remember?" he said, his voice patient like he was talking to a child. "You were so busy with the house, you told me to take care of the business side. I tried to remember. Had I said that?" My head hurt from trying to piece together conversations that felt real but weren't. That evening, his mother called. "Alexis," she said sharply, "why are you embarrassing my son? He's trying to build something for your family, and you're making him look like a criminal." I hung up feeling sick. Something was fundamentally wrong, but I couldn't articulate what. That night, while Mateo slept, I crept into his home office. His laptop sat open on the desk. My hands shook as I opened his email. The first message I found was from the bank, dated 8 months ago. Subject line, "Loan application approved." Emails told a story I didn't want to believe. For nearly a year, Mateo had been planning this loan. Messages with the bank about collateral, income verification, repayment schedules, all using my information, my credit score, my former job history as an accountant, my signature forged so perfectly I might have doubted myself. But it was the other emails that destroyed me. Messages to someone named Mariella, updates about funding for her boutique, photos of a storefront I'd never seen. Plans for a grand opening I knew nothing about. When I confronted him the next morning, breakfast still on the table, he didn't even flinch. "You always wanted to feel important, didn't you?" he said, sipping his coffee. "Congratulations, you're a co-owner now." "What?" "The boutique. Mariella's my business partner. That loan is funding our expansion. You should be grateful I included you. But I didn't agree to this." He shrugged. "You're my wife. Your name carries weight. I used what was available." His casual cruelty took my breath away. This was fraud. This could destroy my credit, my future, everything. Mateo just smiled. "Don't be dramatic, Alexis. It's business. You wouldn't understand." That night, I slept on the couch, my mind racing with questions I didn't want answered. 3 weeks later, the bank called. "First payment overdue," the automated voice said. $1,800. I tried to reach Mateo. His phone went straight to voicemail. I called his office. "He's in meetings all day," his assistant said. "Can I take a message?" I checked our joint account. Nearly empty. The savings we'd built over 5 years gone. When I pulled my credit report, my hands shook so badly I could barely read it. My score had dropped 200 points. The loan was listed as delinquent. Credit card companies were sending warning notices. My parents came over that evening. I tried to explain. "Your husband wouldn't do this," my mother said firmly. "You must have made a mistake." Dad was harsher. "You let him handle everything, Alexis. This is what happens when you don't pay attention." But I was an accountant, I protested weakly, before I quit to support his business. "Exactly," my mother said. "You quit. You gave up your career. Now you're blaming him for taking responsibility." They left before dinner, disappointed and embarrassed by me. I sat alone in our too-large house, surrounded by furniture we couldn't afford, and realized the truth. I'd lost more than money. I'd lost my credibility, my support system, my sense of reality. Everything was crumbling, and the man who'd promised to love me was nowhere to be found. Mateo started rewriting history everywhere. To his family, I was the unstable wife who couldn't remember her own decisions. To our friends, I was dramatic and accusatory. To the bank, I was a cosigner who'd simply forgotten. You said yes, he insisted every time I questioned him. You signed the papers, you agreed to everything. But I knew the truth now. I'd seen the forged signature. I'd found the emails. One night, I heard him talking in the driveway. His voice carried through the open window. "She won't fight back," he said into his phone. "She never does. Just keep the boutique on track. We'll handle the payments once the next round comes through." Next round? There was more. I grabbed my phone and started recording. His voice was clear as he continued. "Alexis is manageable, always has been. She gave up her career, her friends, everything to support me. She's not going anywhere." Laughter from the other end. Mariella's voice, bright and unconcerned. When he came inside, I was sitting in the dark living room. "We need to talk," I said. "Not now," he replied, heading straight upstairs. "I'm exhausted." I sat there until dawn, the recording playing over and over in my headphones. "She won't fight back. She never does." He'd underestimated me. They both had. That was the last mistake they'd make. I played the recording for his mother the next day. She listened, her face carefully blank. Then she stood up and pointed to the door. "Get out of my house," she said. "You recorded my son without permission. You're trying to destroy him." "But you heard what he said," I protested. "He admitted everything." "He's under stress," she snapped. "Building a business is hard. You're making things worse with your paranoia." She physically pushed me toward the door. "My son deserves better than a wife who spies on him." The door slammed in my face. I sat in my car, shaking. No one believed me. No one would help. That night, I packed a suitcase. Not everything, just essentials. Clothes, my laptop, important documents I'd hidden in the back of my closet. Mateo was working late, or with Mariella, I didn't know anymore. I left a note on the kitchen counter. "I need space. Don't contact me." Then I walked out of the house we'd bought together, the life we'd built, the future we'd planned. I had $312 in my personal account, a destroyed credit score, and a heart that felt scraped raw. But I also had something Mateo didn't expect. I had clarity. For the first time in years, I could see exactly who he was, and exactly who I needed to become to survive this. The apartment I found was small, barely 400 square feet, one room serving as bedroom, living room, and kitchen. The bathroom was so tiny I could barely turn around. But it was mine, and it was cheap enough that I could afford it with what little money I had left. I found work at a mechanic shop, doing bookkeeping at night. The owner, a gruff man named Carlos, asked no questions when I showed up desperate for any job. "You know numbers?" he asked. "I used to be an accountant," I admitted. "Good enough," he said. "Start tonight." The shop smelled like oil and metal. The sound of drills and engines became my soundtrack. Every night I'd sit in the small back office, balancing invoices, tracking expenses, finding errors in supplier bills. The work was simple but satisfying. Each number I corrected felt like taking back control. During the day, I started studying again. Online courses in finance, investment banking, corporate law. The public library became my second home. I sat for hours, reading everything I could about how money really worked, how banks made decisions, how investors wielded power. I was learning the game that had been played against me. And slowly, I remembered who I'd been before I became Mrs. Cruz, before I'd given up my career to support his dreams. I'd been smart, capable, ambitious. That person wasn't gone. She'd just been buried under years of manipulation and gaslighting. 3 months after leaving, an official letter arrived at my apartment. The return address made my stomach drop. Cortez National Bank Legal Department. I opened it with shaking hands. Notice of default. Legal action pending. They were going to sue me for the unpaid loan. $180,000 plus interest and penalties. The total was now over $200,000. I couldn't breathe. This would destroy me completely. Bankruptcy. Garnished wages for the rest of my life. I'd never recover. That night I called the only person I could think of. Professor Aldana, my mentor from college. I hadn't spoken to her in 5 years, not since I'd quit my job. She answered on the third ring. "Alexis." Her voice was warm, surprised. I broke down, explaining everything through tears. The loan, the forgery, the lawsuit. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that changed everything. "Money isn't emotional, Alexis. People are. That's why they lose. You need to stop thinking like a victim and start thinking like a player." "How?" I asked desperately. Learn the game, she replied. Really learn it. Then play it better than they do. She gave me assignments, books to read, concepts to master, people to study. Every night after work, I studied. Professor Aldana became my teacher again, guiding me through the complex world of high-level finance. I was building something, not just knowledge, but a plan. 6 months passed. Professor Aldana introduced me to her network, small business owners who needed financial consulting. I started taking clients, cleaning up messy books, finding tax savings, reorganizing failed systems. Word spread quietly. The woman who'd lost everything was helping others save their businesses. My one-room apartment became my office. My kitchen table became a war room covered in spreadsheets and financial statements. Each client taught me something new. Each success built my confidence. One day, a tech startup hired me to untangle their chaotic finances. They were brilliant engineers but terrible with money. I spent 3 weeks restructuring everything, finding inefficiencies, renegotiating contracts. The CEO called me into his office afterward. "You saved us 6 figures," he said, impressed. "How can we repay you?" I thought for a moment. "Stock options," I said. "Give me equity instead of a higher fee." He agreed. 3 months later, that startup was acquired by a major corporation. My small equity stake suddenly became worth real money. Not enough to be rich, but enough to breathe, enough to plan. Every night, I'd look at the letter from Cortez National Bank, still pinned to my wall. They wanted to destroy me. Instead, they'd given me a target. I made myself a promise. I would walk back through those doors someday, and they wouldn't recognize me until it was too late. Mateo finally filed for divorce. The papers arrived via courier, coldly professional. He was claiming I owed him money because the loan had benefited our household. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia who took my case pro bono after hearing my story, actually laughed when she read his demands. "He's delusional," she said. "We have the recording. We have the forged signature. We have the emails to Mariella. The judge will destroy him." The hearing was brief. Mateo showed up in an expensive suit, confident and smiling. His lawyer presented a narrative about a troubled wife who'd agreed to everything then conveniently forgot. Patricia played the recording. Mateo's voice filled the courtroom. "She won't fight back. She never does." His face went pale. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked at him with open disgust. "Mr. Cruz," she said, "this court does not look kindly on fraud or manipulation. The divorce is granted. You will receive nothing. All marital debt associated with fraudulent activity remains with you." As we left, Mateo caught my arm in the hallway. "You'll regret this," he hissed. His confidence was cracking. The business with Mariella was failing. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances. "No," I said calmly, pulling my arm free. "I really won't." I walked away and didn't look back. That night, I allowed myself one moment of satisfaction. Then I got back to work. The divorce was just one piece. The real plan was bigger. 2 years after leaving, my consulting firm had 15 steady clients. I'd moved to a better apartment, rebuilt my credit slowly, and saved every dollar I could. The startup stock options had been reinvested carefully. Professor Aldana taught me how to read market trends, when to take risks, when to hold steady. One client introduced me to venture capital investing, small amounts in promising companies. Most failed, but a few succeeded dramatically. My portfolio grew, not quickly but consistently. I lived simply, worked constantly, and focused on one goal: power, real financial power. I started attending investor meetings, quiet gatherings where serious money changed hands. At first, I was invisible, a woman in her 30s with a modest portfolio, overlooked and underestimated. I preferred it that way. I listened more than I spoke. I learned who had real influence and who was just loud. One evening, I Googled Mateo for the first time in months. His business with Mariella had collapsed completely. Articles about unpaid vendors, angry investors, fraud investigations. He'd tried to build an empire on lies, and it had fallen apart. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity. He was irrelevant now. Then I saw another headline. My breath caught. Cortez National Bank faces major financial crisis. The same bank that had threatened to sue me, that had enabled Mateo's fraud, was failing. Bad loans, poor management, regulatory investigations. They needed capital desperately. I read every article I could find, my heart racing. This was it, my opportunity. At an investor networking event, my business partner mentioned the bank. "Cortez National is looking for private investors," he said casually. "They're desperate. Might be worth looking into." I kept my expression neutral. Send me the details, I said. That night, I pulled every document I'd saved from my case. The forged loan papers, the recording, the emails, the lawsuit threat. I studied the bank's financial reports, public filings, board member profiles. They were drowning. Bad commercial loans, a real estate portfolio that had tanked, mounting legal fees. They needed at least $20 million in fresh capital to stay solvent. I had access to $3 million through various investment vehicles I'd built. It wasn't enough alone, but I knew people now. People with real money who trusted my analysis. I spent 2 weeks building a proposal, a rescue plan for the bank, detailed and professional. Then I made calls. By the end of the month, I'd assembled a group willing to invest $18 million total. With my $3 million, we had $21 million. Exactly what Cortez National needed. The bank's board agreed to meet with us. I insisted on confidentiality. My investment firm would be listed as EC Holdings. No personal names released until after the deal closed. They agreed. They were desperate enough to accept any terms. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning. I spent the night before awake, preparing, remembering. This was justice. Quiet, professional, perfectly legal justice. The day of the meeting, I dressed carefully. A tailored navy suit, professional but not flashy. Pearl earrings my grandmother had given me, heels that made me stand taller. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She was strong, composed, powerful. The broken woman who'd fled with $300 had transformed completely. The bank's headquarters looked exactly as I remembered. Same marble floors, same reception desk, same oppressive feeling of institutional power. But this time, I wasn't here begging for understanding. I was here with money they desperately needed. The receptionist smiled professionally. EC Holdings? Yes, I replied. The executive board is expecting you. She led me to a conference room on the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive leather chairs, a table that could seat 20 people. 5 executives waited, including the bank manager I recognized from that awful day in the loan office. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? Back then, I'd been crying, disheveled, accused of lying. Now I was an investor in a $1,500 suit. The CEO stood, extending his hand. Thank you for meeting with us. We're grateful for your interest in Cortez National. I shook his hand firmly. My team believes in second chances, I said, for institutions that are willing to change. His relief was visible. Over the next 2 hours, they presented their plan. New management, reformed lending policies, community investment. It was almost touching how earnest they seemed. Almost. The negotiations took 3 weeks. Back and forth on terms, equity percentages, board representation. I let my lawyers handle most of it, staying in the background. My business partners thought I was being cautious. They didn't know I was being strategic. Finally, we reached an agreement. $21 million in exchange for 30% equity and 2 board seats. Significant control without taking over completely. The signing ceremony was scheduled for a Tuesday. The day before, I visited the bank alone. I walked through those marble hallways again, remembering the terrified woman I'd been. The manager who'd witnessed my humiliation passed me in the hall. "Good afternoon," he said politely to a stranger. "Good afternoon," I replied. He had no idea who I was. No idea that the woman he'd threatened with lawsuits was about to become his boss's boss. That evening, I tried on 3 different outfits for the signing. Not too flashy, Professor Aldana had advised over the phone. You want them to see power, not revenge. I settled on a charcoal gray suit with a white blouse. Simple, elegant, authoritative. That night, I couldn't sleep. Tomorrow, I would sign papers that would make me a major investor in Cortez National Bank, the same institution that had enabled my husband's fraud, that had threatened to destroy me financially, that had treated me like a liar and a fool. Tomorrow, they would all learn exactly who Alexis Cruz had become, and it would be far too late to do anything about it. The signing ceremony was formal. Photographers from financial publications, a small gathering of bank executives and board members. I arrived with my business partners, keeping to the back initially. The CEO gave a speech about new beginnings and grateful partnerships. Then he introduced the investors. First, the venture capital firm that had contributed $8 million. Then the family trust that had added $5 million. Then he paused, looking at his notes. And finally, the lead investor who organized this rescue, contributing $8 million personally and coordinating the entire effort. EC Holdings, led by its founder, Alexis Cruz. The room went very still. I walked forward slowly, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The CEO's face showed confusion, then recognition, then shock. The bank manager stood frozen by the wall, his mouth slightly open. I shook the CEO's hand firmly, smiling professionally for the cameras. "Thank you for this opportunity," I said clearly. "I believe in accountability and second chances." The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew my story. As I sat down to sign the papers, my hand was completely steady. Each signature was clear, precise, undeniably mine. Not forged, not fake. Real power, legally executed. After the ceremony, several executives congratulated me nervously. The manager who'd witnessed my original humiliation approached hesitantly. "Ms. Cruz, I didn't realize you were the investor. Welcome to Cortez National." "Thank you," I said neutrally. "I'm looking forward to reviewing all our current lending practices." His face went pale. He remembered now. He knew exactly what I was referring to. Good, I thought. Let him sweat. This was just the beginning. As a major investor and board member, I received copies of all significant loan applications for review. It was standard practice for investments over $100,000. I read through them carefully each week, learning the bank's patterns, understanding their decision-making process. Most were legitimate. Small business loans, commercial real estate, standard financing. Then, 3 months after I'd become an investor, a familiar name appeared on my desk. Mateo Cruz. Loan application. $200,000. My hands shook as I opened the file. He was applying for business financing, claiming he had connections with new investors. His application listed inflated income, exaggerated business success, and references I suspected were fake. The business plan was for a new venture. Another boutique, ironically. He'd learned nothing. The same patterns, the same lies, just a new target. I read every page carefully. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Under personal references, he'd listed his relationship with Alexis Cruz, investor at Cortez National Bank. He was using my name, again, claiming we had a professional relationship, suggesting that I would vouch for him. The audacity was stunning. I sat in my office, that application in front of me, and started laughing. Quietly at first, then louder. He had no idea. No idea that the investor he was name-dropping was his ex-wife. No idea that I would see this application. No idea how spectacularly he'd just walked into a trap. I picked up my phone and called the CEO. "We need to schedule a meeting with this applicant," I said. "I have some concerns about his documentation." The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Mateo would present his business plan to a committee of 3. The CEO, the head of commercial lending, and one board investor. Me. I insisted on being present for this one personally, citing concerns about fraud prevention. Given my rescue of the bank, no one questioned my involvement. The morning of the meeting, I arrived early. I wore a different suit, pulled my hair back differently, wore glasses I didn't usually need. Small changes that might delay recognition. I wanted to see his face when he realized. The conference room had a long table. I sat at the far end, reviewing documents as the others arrived. Then Mateo walked in, carrying a leather folder, wearing an expensive suit he probably couldn't afford. He looked older, tired, desperate. The CEO made introductions. "This is our head of commercial lending, and one of our board investors, Ms. Cruz." Mateo's eyes slid over me without recognition. He'd only ever seen me as his wife, never as a professional, never as someone with power. He began his presentation. Confident, smooth, lying with practiced ease. The boutique concept, the market research, the projected returns, it was all fabricated. I could see it in every number. Halfway through, I interrupted. "Mr. Cruz, these revenue projections seem optimistic. What are they based on?" He barely glanced my way. "Market analysis and comparable business models." "Can you provide documentation?" He hesitated. "It's proprietary information, I see. And these personal references? They're solid," he said. "I have strong professional connections in the financial community." I leaned forward slightly. "Including your ex-wife." The room went silent. Mateo's head snapped toward me, really looking for the first time. His face went through several emotions at once. Confusion, recognition, shock, fear. "Alexis?" he whispered. I smiled politely. "Hello, Mateo. You listed me as a professional reference. I thought I should attend this meeting personally." His mouth opened and closed. The CEO looked between us, confused. You two know each other. We were married, I explained calmly. Until he forged my signature on a fraudulent loan application at this bank for $180,000. Mateo stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. This is a misunderstanding. He turned to the CEO. She's biased. She can't be objective about my application. I opened the folder in front of me. Actually, I'm the perfect person to evaluate it because I recognize the pattern. The inflated income, false. The business references, fabricated. The claim of existing investor relationships, non-existent. I slid documents across the table. Copies of his previous fraud, the divorce judgment, the failed business with Mariella. His record speaks for itself, I said. The CEO's face hardened as he reviewed the papers. Mr. Cruz, this meeting is over. Your application is denied. Furthermore, we'll be reporting these false statements to the appropriate authorities. Mateo's face turned red. You planned this, he hissed at me. You set me up. No, I replied calmly. You walked into a situation you created. I just made sure there were consequences this time. Mateo tried to argue, to explain, to manipulate, but the CEO called security. As they escorted him out, he shouted back at me, You're vindictive. You always were. I didn't respond. Just watched him leave the same way I'd left him years ago, except I'd left with nothing and built everything. He'd started with everything and destroyed it all. After he was gone, the CEO turned to me. I apologize, Ms. Cruz. If we'd known about your history with this bank and this applicant, I would have handled this differently. You handled it perfectly, I said. This is exactly why I invested here, to make sure the lending practices actually change. Over the next week, I reviewed every loan Mateo had been involved with. There were others. 2 more applications under different business names, all with fraudulent information. I documented everything and sent it to the bank's compliance officer. Quietly, professionally, devastatingly thorough. Within 2 weeks, Mateo's credit was completely destroyed. Every bank in the region had been notified about his fraudulent applications. He was blacklisted. His last chance at financial recovery was gone. And the beautiful part, I never confronted him directly, never gloated or explained. I just pulled the strings quietly, the way powerful people do. He'd taught me that people with real power don't need to shout. They just need to act. And I had acted perfectly. 6 months after the loan denial, Cortez National Bank organized a major media event. They were celebrating their recovery, highlighting the new investor partnerships that had saved the institution. The CEO invited all major investors to attend and asked if I'd be willing to speak about second chances and institutional reform. I agreed. The event was held at an upscale hotel ballroom. Local media, business community leaders, bank employees, and customers. Several hundred people attended. I prepared my speech carefully, focusing on accountability, transparency, and the importance of treating all customers with dignity. That morning, I received an unexpected call from the bank's PR director. We have a situation, she said. Someone named Mateo Cruz has been trying to contact multiple board members and executives, claiming he needs to speak urgently about investment opportunities. I smiled to myself. Is he on the guest list? No, but he's been persistent. Handle it as you see fit, I said. If he shows up, let security manage it. The event began at noon. I sat on the stage with other board members and executives as the CEO gave opening remarks. The ballroom was elegant, filled with the kind of people Mateo had always wanted to impress. People with real money and real power. People who would never take him seriously again. And then, right on schedule, I saw him, standing at the back of the ballroom, having somehow talked his way past security. Mateo looked different. His suit was cheaper, worn. His face was thinner, desperate. He was scanning the room, clearly looking for someone specific. When his eyes landed on the stage, on me sitting among the bank executives, he froze. The CEO continued speaking, introducing the key investors who'd saved the bank. First, Westland Capital. Applause. Then Aldana Family Trust. More applause. And finally, our lead investor who coordinated this entire rescue effort. Please welcome Alexis Cruz, founder of EC Holdings and member of our board of directors. I stood and walked to the podium. The applause was warm, genuine. I could feel Mateo's eyes on me from the back of the room. Good afternoon, I began. My voice was steady, clear. 5 years ago, I sat in a lone office in this very bank, accused of lying about fraud I'd experienced firsthand. Today, I stand before you as an investor and board member of the same institution. The room was silent, attentive. That journey taught me something important, I continued. Systems only change when those who have been harmed by them gain enough power to transform them. We've implemented new lending practices, stronger fraud prevention, and accountability measures. Because second chances should be real, not just words. The audience applauded. I spoke for 10 more minutes about specific reforms, about protecting customers, about institutional responsibility. When I finished, the standing ovation was genuine. As I returned to my seat, I glanced toward the back. Mateo was still there, standing frozen. Our eyes met across the crowded room. I raised my glass slightly in acknowledgement, then turned away. After the speeches, there was a reception. I mingled professionally, discussing market trends and investment strategies with people who now respected my opinion. Then the CEO approached with an uncomfortable expression. "Ms. Cruz," he said quietly, "the gentleman at the door is asking to speak with you. Claims it's urgent." I knew who he meant. "Let him in," I said. "Might as well finish this." Mateo approached carefully, like he was navigating a minefield. "Can we talk, privately?" "We can talk here," I replied. Several bank executives were within earshot, a protective buffer. He lowered his voice. "You planned all of this, bought into the bank, waited for me to apply, destroyed me publicly." I sipped my champagne. "I invested in an institution I believed could change. You applied with fraudulent information. Those facts aren't related. You're lying." The CEO stepped forward. "Mr. Cruz, I'll ask you to leave. Or should I explain to everyone here how you committed loan fraud?" Mateo's face reddened. Looking at me, he said through clenched teeth, "You did this for revenge." "No," I replied calmly. "I did this to survive. The revenge is just a side effect." As security escorted him out, he kept turning back, shouting, "Everyone will know what you did, how you manipulated everything." But no one was listening. The people in that room saw a successful investor and a desperate man making accusations. They knew who had credibility: me. Later, as I left the event, I passed by the bank's main entrance. The same doors I'd walked through broken and terrified years ago. Now I walked through them with my head high, holding power instead of debt. Next morning, local news outlets covered the bank's recovery event. Several featured photos of me speaking at the podium. Tech investor helps save local bank. From fraud victim to board member, Alexis Cruz's journey. The stories detailed my background carefully. How I'd been victimized by loan fraud, how I'd rebuilt my career, how I'd ultimately invested in the same bank. It was being covered as a redemption story, empowerment, transformation. The articles mentioned Mateo only briefly. A footnote about the original fraud case. The focus was on what I'd built, not what he'd destroyed. My phone rang constantly. Interview requests, speaking invitations, investment inquiries. People wanted to know how I'd done it, how I'd come back from financial ruin to this. The answer was simple but not easy. I'd learned the rules of the game, then played it better than the people who'd tried to destroy me. Professor Aldana called that afternoon. "I'm proud of you," she said. "You took pain and transformed it into power. That's rare." "Thank you for teaching me," I replied. "I taught you theory," she corrected. "You taught yourself survival." That evening, I sat in my office looking at old documents, the forged loan papers, the threatening letter from the bank, the divorce judgment. I'd kept them all, not as wounds, but as evidence of a journey. Tomorrow, I'd attend my first official board meeting at Cortez National. I'd help make decisions about lending policies, fraud prevention, and institutional accountability. The girl who'd been crushed by this system was now helping rebuild it. That was real power, not destruction, transformation. 3 months later, the bank organized a formal ribbon-cutting ceremony. They were opening a new community banking center focused on financial literacy and small business support, programs I'd helped design and fund. The CEO asked several community leaders to participate in the ceremony: local officials, business owners, nonprofit directors. And ironically, they invited Mateo. He'd apparently been networking, presenting himself as a local entrepreneur despite his failures. No one had connected him to me yet. The day of the ceremony, I arrived early. The new center was beautiful, bright, and welcoming. Everything a community bank should be. As people gathered, I saw Mateo arrive. He was networking, shaking hands, trying to seem important. When he saw me, he paled. But it was too late to leave. The ceremony began with speeches about community investment and second chances. When it was time for the ribbon cutting, the CEO handed scissors to the participants. We stood in a line. Mateo was at one end, I was at the other. The photographer positioned everyone. On 3, the CEO said, 1, 2, 3. The ribbon fell. Cameras flashed. And then the banner behind us dropped, revealing the dedication plaque. Cortez National Community Center, made possible through the generous support of EC Holdings and lead investor Alexis Cruz. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People turned to look at me, at Mateo, connecting the dots. The CEO, realizing the situation too late, looked uncomfortable. But I stepped forward calmly, taking the microphone. This center represents what's possible when institutions choose accountability over profit, I said. When they protect customers instead of enabling fraud. My gaze swept over Mateo briefly. When they learn from their mistakes. The crowd applauded. Mateo stood frozen, scissors still in his hand, surrounded by people who now understood exactly who we both were. After the ceremony, he didn't approach me, just left quietly, his networking efforts ruined. I stayed for 2 hours, talking to community members, explaining the programs, feeling genuinely proud of what we'd built. A week after the ribbon cutting, I found an envelope on my office desk. No return address, just my name handwritten on the front. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, the handwriting shaky and uneven. Alexis, it began. I know you won't believe this, but I need to say it anyway. You won, completely. I lost the business, my credit, my reputation, everything. People cross the street to avoid me now. I can't get a loan anywhere. Can't start over. You made sure of that. I wanted to write this to tell you that you were right, about everything. What I did was wrong. The forgery, the lies, using your name. I told myself I was building something for us, but really I was just taking what wasn't mine. Watching you at that ceremony, seeing what you built from nothing, I finally understood. You didn't just survive what I did to you. You became someone I could never be, someone with actual integrity. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that you taught me something I should have learned years ago. Some debts aren't paid in money. They're paid in watching someone you underestimated become everything you pretended to be. I hope you're proud of yourself. You should be, Mateo. I read the letter 3 times, looking for manipulation or hidden agenda. But it seemed genuine, broken, final. I sat with it for a long moment, feeling nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no pity, just a quiet sense of completion. That afternoon, I drove to the new community center. They were installing the final fixtures, preparing for the official opening next week. I walked through the bright spaces designed to help people understand their finances, protect themselves from fraud, build real stability. In the main education room, workers were mounting a series of framed quotes on the wall, inspirational messages about financial literacy and empowerment. I asked them to add one more. They handed me a marker and a blank frame. I thought for a moment, then wrote, "Some debts aren't paid in money, they're paid in dignity." I signed it simply, AC. The worker mounted it on the wall alongside the others. It looked right there, a reminder that survival wasn't enough. Transformation was the real victory. That evening, I sat in my real office now, not a one-room apartment, but a proper space with windows and furniture I'd chosen. I took out Mateo's letter and placed it in a file folder labeled Closed Accounts. Not thrown away, just filed, finished, done. My phone buzzed with a message from Professor Aldana. Dinner next week to celebrate? I smiled and replied, absolutely. I have so much to tell you. As the sun set over the city, I stood at my window looking out at the skyline. 5 years ago, I'd left a house with $300 and a destroyed life. Today, I had a successful consulting firm, a seat on a bank's board, investments across multiple industries, and most importantly, I had myself back. The woman Mateo had tried to bury under manipulation and fraud had emerged stronger, smarter, and infinitely more powerful than he'd ever been. I didn't destroy him in the end. He destroyed himself by continuing the same patterns, making the same mistakes, never learning or growing. I'd simply made sure that when he fell, there was no one to catch him. No forged signatures to save him. No wife to gaslight, just consequences. The phone rang. Another client, another opportunity, another step forward. I answered professionally, ready to work, ready to build, ready to help someone else understand that financial literacy was power and knowledge was armor. Because that's what I did now. I turned pain into purpose. I transformed victims into survivors. I taught people the same lesson I'd learned the hard way. The game wasn't rigged against you if you learned the rules and played them better than everyone else. Mateo had taught me that people with real power don't need to shout or threaten. They just need to act decisively, strategically, and without emotion. I'd learned that lesson well, maybe too well, but I'd never apologize for it. As I worked late into the evening, I thought about the girl who'd sat in that bank office 5 years ago, shaking and afraid. I wished I could tell her that everything would be okay, that she'd survive this, that she'd become someone even she couldn't imagine yet. But maybe she'd known all along. Maybe that's why she'd recorded the phone call, why she'd saved every document, why she'd left before she lost herself completely. Maybe some part of her had always known she was stronger than the man trying to break her. The city lights reflected off my window as I closed my laptop. Tomorrow, I had a board meeting. Next week, 3 new consulting clients. Next month, a speaking engagement about financial recovery and institutional reform. My calendar was full. My bank account was healthy. My credit was rebuilt. My reputation was solid. And my revenge complete. Not loud, not dramatic, just thorough, professional, and absolutely devastating. Exactly the way it should be. I turned off the lights and locked my office. Walking to my car, I passed the bank's main entrance one more time. The lights inside were still on, security guards making their rounds. This institution that had once threatened to destroy me was now partly mine. Its policies were being shaped by my voice. Its future was tied to my investment. The irony was perfect. The justice was complete. And I was finally completely free. Not from Mateo, from ever needing anyone to validate my worth again. That was the real victory, not the money or the power or the perfect revenge, but knowing deeply and certainly that I could survive anything, build from nothing, transform pain into something meaningful. I drove home through the quiet city streets, windows down, breathing in the night air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new battles to fight. But tonight, I could rest knowing that the girl who'd been crushed 5 years ago had become a woman no one would ever crush again. And that was worth more than any amount of money in any bank account. That was priceless.